The Young and the Restless spoilers. Saturday's full episodes. June 21st, 2025. As darkness cloaked the ancient French countryside, a foreboding silence settled over the sprawling estate that had become the epicenter of whispers and speculation. The castle, an eerie monument to forgotten nobility, perched atop a hill like a beast guarding its secrets, stood quietly illuminated by golden candlelight and the chilling glint of moonlight on its centuries-old stone. It was here that Aristotle Dumas, the elusive architect of this elaborate gathering, prepared to reveal truths that had long simmered beneath the surface of Genoa City's most powerful families. But before the grand unveiling, key players were still being drawn into the web. Lily Winters arrived at the estate with Devon by her side, her heels tapping nervously against the polished marble floors of the candlelit corridor that stretched endlessly forward. Though she wore a mask of elegance and calm, her heart throbbed with anxiety. Damien Kane, ever enigmatic and always a few paces behind, followed them in with a gaze that surveyed every detail like a soldier entering enemy territory. He had been invited by Dumas himself, though he still wasn't certain why. The tension between the three was palpable. Lily had barely processed Damien's involvement in the Newman family's latest scandal, and Devon, though protective of his sister, was trying to decipher whether Damien was a threat or a reluctant pawn. Elsewhere in the estate, the grand hallway opened into a maze constructed of boxwood hedges, ivy-covered walls, and winding stone corridors, a surreal blend of aristocratic grandeur and psychological torment. It wasn't merely a decorative amusement for guests. It was a metaphorical crucible, a symbolic journey designed to disorient, challenge, and force reflection. For Phyllis Summers, the maze was more than a path through shrubs. It was a treacherous reminder of every trap she had narrowly escaped, every betrayal she had survived, and every man who had broken her heart but never truly destroyed her. She stepped cautiously into the labyrinth, her crimson dress flowing like spilled wine across the gravel. With each turn, shadows danced, whispers echoed from unseen places, and anxiety clawed at her throat. Her mind reeled with questions. Why had Dumas summoned her here? Was this an elaborate trap or a strategic opportunity? Just when the weight of the moment seemed unbearable, a familiar voice sliced through the eerie stillness. "Welcome to the most exclusive, extravagant, and bizarre party in the world," came Nick Newman's voice from a few feet ahead. Phyllis gasped, stunned and grateful all at once. For a moment, all the suspicion melted from her eyes as she stepped into his arms, drawn not just by affection but by the comfort of someone who had always, despite everything, understood her chaos. "This place, this maze, it's like some twisted chessboard for real people," she muttered, her voice strained with panic. But Nick, ever the steadying force, pulled her close and murmured, "No, it's not. Look at everything you've been through. You always survive, Phyllis. You always find a way." Their embrace was long and wordless, a collision of old wounds and unspoken forgiveness. In that fleeting moment, it seemed that whatever games Dumas was orchestrating had no power over the warmth they shared. But they weren't alone. A few paces away, Sharon Newman lingered, her back pressed to a cold stone pillar, her body partially obscured by a flowering trellis. Her breath hitched as she watched them. Phyllis, tangled in Nick's arms, smiling, finding solace. Her heart twisted in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't jealousy, it was a chilling recognition that something foundational might be shifting under her feet. Sharon had followed them not out of pettiness, but out of concern. Ever since the party began, something had felt wrong, too curated, too symbolic. She sensed there was more at play than wine and whispered secrets. And now, watching Nick comfort the woman who had caused her so much pain in the past, Sharon felt the subtle pang of history threatening to repeat itself. Her instincts flared like wildfire, warning her of emotional landmines buried beneath every smile, every glance, every embrace exchanged in the maze. Still, she composed herself, brushed imaginary dust from her dress, and stepped into the light. "Phyllis," she said brightly, with a smile so radiant it almost masked the storm behind her eyes. Phyllis turned, her body stiffening slightly as she recognized the voice, but Sharon's tone was disarming. I didn't know you were still out here. Quite the event, huh, she added, as if she hadn't just watched them cling to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Nick remained silent, his eyes flicking between the two women, aware that one misstep could ignite a new war. Meanwhile, back inside the castle's great hall, a symphony of murmurs crescendoed as guests began to realize something. Or someone was about to shift the course of the evening. A figure appeared at the top of the staircase, dressed in sharp, timeless black. His presence commanded silence before he even spoke. Aristotle Dumas had finally decided to step into the light. He descended slowly, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. His eyes scanned the crowd not with arrogance, but with calculated clarity. These were the people whose lives he had touched from the shadows. Some had been elevated, others nearly ruined. And tonight, he intended to show them that every move had a purpose. Behind him trailed a woman few had seen before but who bore an eerie resemblance to someone from the Newman family's past, someone Victor had once known intimately and then discarded without remorse. Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs of "is that her?" and "it can't be" swept through the crowd. Victor's face drained of color as he stood frozen, the glass in his hand trembling slightly. Nikki stared at the woman, recognition dawning like a thunderclap. This woman, this ghost of Victor's past, had returned not alone, but with the very son he had denied decades ago. And now that man stood before them as Aristotle Dumas, not merely a guest of the evening but the host, the puppeteer, and perhaps the rightful heir to everything Victor had built. Up in the rafters, Sharon, who had rejoined the group with Nick and Phyllis flanking her on either side, stiffened as the implications settled over her. She'd suspected Dumas had ties to someone powerful in Genoa City, but this? This was a declaration of war. Devon exchanged a grim glance with Lily, while Damien Kane, who had known more than he had shared, kept his gaze locked on Dumas, silently calculating whether he had just been drafted into a battle that would consume them all. As Aristotle raised his glass, he didn't need to tap a fork or call for silence. The room had already given him its undivided attention. "Some of you know me as a business rival," he began smoothly, "some as an investor, others perhaps as an enigma. But tonight, you will all come to know me for who I truly am." He turned slightly toward Victor and smiled, an elegant, chilling smile. Every maze has its center. Every story its origin. And every lie, its reckoning. In the crowd, the reactions ranged from confusion to dread. Tucker McCall furrowed his brow, sensing the power play about to unfold. Victoria's hand moved instinctively to Claire's shoulder, tightening protectively. Phyllis grabbed Nick's hand without realizing it, her breath caught in her throat. Sharon, watching Aristotle's every move, finally understood that this gathering hadn't been about luxury, elegance, or status, it was a crucible. One where every truth buried by time would claw its way back to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. The party was only beginning, but the game had already changed. If you'd like me to continue this storyline further, such as Sharon confronting Phyllis, or Aristotle revealing shocking secrets about Victor, or even Damien having to make a moral choice, I can write the next part as well. Just let me know. Elsewhere within the maze. Far from the intimate exchange between Phyllis and Nick and the watchful eyes of Sharon, Kyle Abbott wandered alone, the dense hedges rising on either side of him like green walls concealing not only direction but intention. The setting sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows and golden hues through the gaps in the vines. He had lost signal a few turns back and had attempted to retrace his steps, but the maze's complexity had rapidly outpaced his sense of orientation. His footsteps echoed softly on the gravel as his mind drifted between concern for his family and the growing unease in his chest. Then, suddenly, a rustling noise behind one of the corners startled him, and before he could react, he rounded a tight bend and bumped straight into someone. It was Audra. The collision was gentle, but it drew them both into momentary contact, Kyle instinctively reaching to steady her as she stumbled slightly. "Sorry," he muttered quickly, brushing a hand through his hair in mild embarrassment. Audra gave a half-smile, brushing non-existent dust off her dress, the soft scent of her perfume already lingering in the air between them. "It's fine," she replied coolly, her eyes narrowing slightly in amusement. "You lost, or were you following me?" The question hovered somewhere between playful and accusatory, and Kyle found himself smirking despite the circumstances. "I was actually trying to get a signal," he explained, holding up his phone and watching the no-service message blink stubbornly on the screen. "Wanted to check in, see how Cole's doing." That name, spoken aloud, made Audra's expression shift slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it struck Kyle as genuine. "I hope he's okay," she said after a pause, her tone softer than usual. Kyle blinked, surprised. "You care?" he asked, his voice more curious than critical. Audra met his gaze without flinching. "I do," she said. "I've been trying to get in touch with Nate Hastings, actually. There's someone, a mutual friend. They're battling cancer. I thought maybe Nate could help." The vulnerability in her voice was foreign, unfamiliar, and for the first time in a long time, Kyle saw past her curated armor. He saw a glimmer of the woman behind the calculated moves, the whispered deals, the broken alliances. "I've never seen this side of you," he admitted quietly. "The human side." Audra chuckled, the sound brittle but honest. "Don't get used to it." A beat passed between them, heavy with unsaid thoughts. Kyle's eyes lingered on the perfume bottle in her hand, a new fragrance, he assumed, judging by the label. Without thinking, he nodded toward it. "Is that your new scent?" She raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of trying it?" He hesitated, then shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Curious." Audra smirked. "Absolutely not," she said quickly. But after a moment, perhaps charmed, or merely entertained, she relented, lifting the bottle and spraying a faint mist onto the side of her neck. The delicate aroma unfurled in the air, warm and floral with a sharp, magnetic edge. Kyle stepped closer, drawn in like a moth to flame, and leaned slightly, inhaling deeply as his nose brushed just above her skin. "Well?" she asked, her voice low, almost teasing. Kyle straightened, the scent still clinging to his senses like a memory he couldn't shake. "It's intoxicating." Meanwhile, far from the twisting hedges and flirtatious tension, the train carrying Lily Winters, Damien Kane, and Devin Winters sliced through the rural French countryside, its rhythmic hum occasionally interrupted by the distant sound of wildlife or the wind rustling the leaves. Inside their luxurious carriage, the atmosphere was tense. Damien leaned against the window, watching the scenery blur past, a sense of unreality thick in the air. "I never imagined anything like this," he said aloud, not to anyone in particular, his voice tinged with awe and skepticism. "A castle party hosted by a man no one truly understands, an invitation wrapped in riddles and threats." Lily paced the length of the cabin, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "It's not just a party, Damien. It's a setup. Something about this feels wrong." Devin nodded in agreement, his jaw set. "It's too theatrical. Dumas isn't hosting this to celebrate. He's hosting it to expose." Damien tilted his head toward Lily. "You think we're targets?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to face them both, her eyes sharp. "I think we're pawns. And I think he's already made his moves." The door to their cabin opened abruptly, and Carter Walton appeared, dapper as always, but his expression unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a practiced smile, "outdoor cocktails will be served shortly after we pass through the grounds. The host wants you refreshed when you arrive." Lily arched a brow. "Outdoor cocktails? Sounds like another maze." Carter's grin widened just a fraction. "You'll see when you get there." As he disappeared back into the corridor, Damien leaned forward, his voice dropping. "He's in on it. Not sure how, but he knows more than he's letting on." Devin sighed, tension thick in his shoulders. "Then we need to be careful." Stay together. Trust no one. Outside, the castle loomed larger with each passing minute, its ancient towers scraping the twilight sky like a warning. And within its walls, the web continued to weave. Kyle and Audra drifted deeper into the maze, unaware that their flirtation was being watched from afar by Dumas's surveillance network. Sharon, having returned to the Grand Hall, kept replaying the moment she saw Phyllis and Nick in her mind. Phyllis, now clutching Nick's hand with both warmth and fear, was quietly unraveling as she sensed that the next phase of Dumas's plan was about to begin. And in the castle's highest tower, Aristotle Dumas stood once again before his collection of monitors, watching them all. Guests scattered through the maze, lovers tangled in nostalgia, rivals caught off guard, old wounds reopened in candlelight. His hand hovered over a small switch embedded in the control panel. One flick, and the true heart of the labyrinth would open. One flick, and every game he had set in motion would converge in chaos. He smiled to himself. The night was far from over. The maze grew narrower the deeper they ventured, the hedges drawing in like jaws around a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud. The once glorious golden hour had dimmed into twilight, and the path ahead twisted like a serpent, unfamiliar, enclosing, endless. Damien Kane's pace slowed, his breath beginning to hitch in rapid, shallow draws. Lily noticed the tension in his shoulders first, the way his eyes darted from corner to corner as if measuring the proximity of every leaf and vine. Then, without warning, he stopped entirely, clutching the edge of a wooden trellis for balance. I can't breathe, he gasped. I'm claustrophobic. I can't be in here. I need out, now. His voice cracked under the pressure, breaking through the serene illusion of aristocratic decorum like a gunshot in a cathedral. Lily moved toward him instantly, her voice steady, soothing. Look up, she said gently, placing a hand on his chest. There's open sky above us, and the ground is solid beneath your feet. You're not trapped. You're just in between. Her words were deliberate, rhythmic, an anchor cast into a storming sea. Damien's breathing slowed, not completely, but enough for the panic to loosen its grip. Devon, standing a few feet away with arms crossed and jaw clenched, didn't bother to hide his irritation. Maybe this whole thing wasn't for you, Devon muttered, just low enough for Lily to catch it. Devon, she warned, but the tension between the two men hung in the air like static. Damien straightened, eyes blazing with frustration and shame, and turned away without another word, willing his legs to keep moving until the suffocating hedges gave way to open space again. Meanwhile, the castle's courtyard began to pulse with the soft glow of hanging lanterns and the murmur of low conversation. Guests emerged from the maze and the hallways, some flushed from the wine, others pale from the confusion. Near the elaborately adorned bar area, Billy Abbott leaned against a marble pillar, swirling a glass of amber liquor in his hand as he bantered lightly with Sally Spectra, who was dressed in yet another jaw-dropping ensemble. A crimson gown that clung like liquid fire and made even the most composed guests stop and stare. You sure know how to make an entrance, Billy quipped, his tone flirtatious but laced with something heavier underneath. Sally gave a sly smile, raising her glass. And you sure know how to pretend you're not impressed. Before the moment could deepen, Diane Jenkins swept into the area with Jack Abbott by her side, her heels clicking against the stone like punctuation marks in a paragraph meant to command attention. Her eyes scanned the space, sharp and purposeful. Have you seen Kyle? She asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Sally raised an eyebrow. Not recently. Billy took a sip, glancing toward the maze. He's around. Somewhere. Just then, as if summoned by name, Kyle and Audra appeared at the edge of the crowd. Kyle's expression was unreadable, his tie slightly loosened, and Audra walked beside him with effortless confidence, her perfume still clinging to her neck like a whispered secret. They made their way toward the bar, where Kyle took it upon himself to mix her a cocktail. His fingers moved with assurance, though his recipe was evidently less than perfect. Audra took one sip and grimaced subtly. Bold, she said flatly, setting the glass down. I'll take that as a no, Kyle chuckled. She waved him off, sliding into a nearby chair to collect herself. It wasn't long before Diane approached, taking the seat beside her like a queen descending into a rival's court. Her smile was tight, calculated, her eyes sharp as ever. You and Kyle seem to be collaborating quite a bit lately, Diane said casually, her voice low and smooth. Lots of coordination, lots of time spent, side by side. She let the sentence linger, then tilted her head. I do hope that's not a problem, for anyone. Audra turned slowly, matching Diane's gaze with equal steel. Not at all, she said, her tone sweet and unbothered. Unless, of course, there's something I should be concerned about? Diane didn't blink. Only if your intentions are more permanent than professional. Elsewhere, Lily, Damien, and Devon finally emerged from the maze's final turn, stepping out into the courtyard with barely concealed relief. The cool night air hit them like freedom, though the tension remained just below the surface. Sharon and Nick followed closely behind, their earlier reunion with Phyllis still fresh in their minds and layered with unspoken conflict. Sharon paused for a moment, staring back toward the maze as though expecting something, or someone, to follow them out. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her brow furrowed in thought. I can't help but feel like someone's watching us, she said quietly. Like this is less of a party and more of a psychological experiment. Phyllis, nearby and still rattled from the intensity of her own journey through the hedges, nodded. It feels like a test, she agreed. One we didn't agree to take. Devon stood a few feet away, staring up at the towering castle. Is Dumas really delayed? He asked aloud. Or is he already here, watching everything unfold from somewhere in that fortress? His tone wasn't accusatory, just speculative, but it stirred something uneasy in the others.